Hello everyone, welcome again. I was going to go today to do this video by the river because I find myself rather in a melancholic mood, and I thought that I could say what I'm going to say now by the river with the ducks there in isolation. And but it started raining, so here I am at home still. Several things I want to cover today. First, I read, this is perhaps old news, perhaps a few days old, that in Ireland 300,000 cows are by order of the government to be killed. 300,000 for the sake of the planet. I suppose that people are up in arms and I don't know whether this will take place, but it's a follow-up, isn't it, from, you remember a few months ago in the Netherlands, 30,000 farmers were being asked to give up their farms for the planet too. And this perhaps is not going to happen. The farmers started a political party which actually won quite a lot of representation and so on. So we don't know how these things are going to develop. But I started thinking about different things based on this. And clearly people are being led. I have come to the conclusion now that we're being led by immoral or amoral leaders, and the question is always, what is the purpose? What is the final aim of this? And because we now find that we have been lied to, we don't think that is just the planet. Obviously, there are some other purposes here and some other aims. I want to go back to one of the main problems that we see at the moment is that people in many countries, I find, are still believing everything that they hear from the press, from the legacy press, is called nowadays. We just had an election here in Britain yesterday, a by-election we call it. Is sort of, not quite, a midterm thing. And the Conservatives won again, even though there was a swing to the Labour Party, but they have won again. I was thinking about why the Conservatives won again. There was, of course, the Labour Party. There was a third party also. And, I have to assume that people know what they're doing. And in that by-election that they have decided that, yes, we know what the Conservative Party is doing, has done or hasn't done, but nevertheless we still think it's better than the opposite party. That's fine. But there is a lot of discontent too, and I don't know why a third party, for example, these are my thoughts, a third party was not given a chance if a lot of people are dissatisfied, because this old idea that you spoil the ballot because this party is not going to win and so on, that was a tactical voting. But things have come to a head now, and I think that perhaps third parties should be given a chance too, but I don't think people are willing to do so yet. So my question is, perhaps the majority of the people, thought about it, obviously, and they decided that even though they were not terribly satisfied with the party in government at the moment, that they decided, nevertheless, that is a better choice than the other one. But I am wondering, too, how many people don't even know what is happening. A lot of people are still listening to the news and accepting that, the BBC and all these other news outlets are still, like the 1950s, when you could, to a very large extent, trust what they were saying. And I think that probably there is quite a lot of those people too. What to do? I was also thinking about what is happening in Europe, the Eastern countries, and their relationship with Russia. And, so many of the Eastern countries, practically all of them, who had been either part of the Soviet Union or under the yoke of the Soviet Union. How these old hatreds are coming back to the fore. Let me tell you, this has happened so many times. Let me give you the example of Spain, for example. After Franco died in 1975, I think I covered this in another video many months ago, but I think it's to the purpose now. I'm just going to use it as an example of what is happening in Eastern European countries. Spain was so ready for democracy that they actually did a very good job. The people in general, they transfer from a dictatorship to a democracy. They were ready for it. They were eager to have it without any violence, without any recriminations, as if the whole of the people came together and said, okay, we had a terrible civil war. Our grandparents and great-grandparents, okay, they fought this battle, but let us put it to rest. This is part of history. We accept that history. You cannot erase history. What happened, but let's move on now. And they did a very good job of it, the Spanish people. And then, unfortunately, in the 2010s, a socialist party came to power, the prime minister being a guy called Zapatero, who was, we learned later, a Freemason and so on, but started stirring up the pot, stirring up all hatreds, talking incessantly about the Civil War and how the Republican side and how this and wanted to led the people to look back and start distrusting and hating each other again. And to a certain extent, it's still going on. There's going to be an election tomorrow in Spain, but for now more than 10 years, the political divide has been this, about the old hatreds of the Civil War and whether you are on one side and the other side. That was a pity, because the country had moved on so peacefully. And I think, this is an example, and I think that what is happening in Eastern Europe, it's more of the same, a little bit, because all hatreds are being stirred up again. It seems that after the Soviet Union fell in 1991-92, that all these countries became independent and they moved on, each doing the best they could to catch up in many cases, and anyway, just to move on and do the best they could. And now these old hatreds and resentments are being stirred up, and we see them. It's not only in Poland, it's in Lithuania, for example. They are also, as Ukraine did, going to banish the Russian language. They all speak Russian, but they're going to banish it. I don't know what they're going to put in its place. A country of not quite 5 million people, less than that, I think. The Baltic states and so on. Everyone is, at the moment, those who had been under the yoke of the Soviet Union, very much now bringing back all the resentments and all the hatreds. And this is not going to end well for Eastern Europe. I sometimes think, why is it so difficult for them to realize that the Russian people were also the victims of that regime? They suffered too. Just as much as these other countries did, in some cases perhaps even more. And they have to deal with that reality and move on. In the case of Poland and these other countries, it seems to me that there is also a sense of wanting to be part of Western Europe so much that they are abandoning who they are. This is what I mean. In the case of Western Europe, for example, countries like Spain, Ireland, perhaps even Greece to a certain extent, Portugal. These were countries in the periphery that were for a long time, either because of their political systems or their history or whatever it might be, they had been sort of put aside, looked down upon a little bit. The Irish people will know what I'm talking about with their long history. Fighting for their own country and so on. But they were not really part of the club. And so when they became part of that Western European club, the European Union, they become more European Union than any other country in the European Union. In other words, as if you have been excluded, and you couldn't sit at the table, all of a sudden you were invited to the table and there you were. Now you were the same as everybody else. And so they have this, they are very, very pro-European Union because of that, because now they have been invited in. Think about it in individual, personal, people's terms, when you have been laughed at and derided and despised, and all of a sudden you are invited to the table. You become more of the club than the old members of the club. And this is, I think, what is happening in Eastern Europe. They are becoming they so want to please the West and to tell the West that yes, we are like you, we belong to, the West, that they are forgetting who they are. Who are we? Okay, as a person, not knowing who you are. It's dangerous for human beings and for nations. I have to go back to my childhood. I think I covered this also many months ago. But let me give you an example of what I mean. I have my defects and my shortcomings as you do. But there is one thing that I cannot accuse myself of, and that is of not knowing myself. I do know myself. I do know why I do things or I fail to do things and all that. And if I don't know, it's not because I'm not trying to, or because I blame someone else for my problems. I'm going to give you an example of when I've been doing this all my life, you see, because I was trained to go to confession when I was 7 years old. And I'm going to tell you how that happened. As I said, those of you who have heard it before, I did a video on this, sort of, with a smile on my face, sharing with you how it was in those days, in the 1950s Spain. And as you know, I was brought up by nuns. So anyway, it was going to be I'm going to make a point. This is an example, okay? I'm going to make a point of it. Anyway, so you're going to make, you have your first communion, and so you have to have your first confession. And so this is how I was taught how to go to confession, okay? So you don't just go. You have to think about your sins, and then you have to accept that you have done those wrong things, and then you have to repent. You have to try and promise that you will not do it again. Chances are that you will, perhaps, but at that moment you're really sorry. They put it in baby language for me, okay? So you're really, really sorry, and you promise not to do it again, and so on. That is confession, okay? But you have to think about your sins first, okay? And the nun told me, okay, now tell me about something that, as an example, for example, something that you did wrong. Well, it could be, she said, that you pulled someone else's hair, which is the wrong thing to do, right? You shouldn't go around kicking people and your friends and pulling people's hair, right? Right, okay. So now you don't go and confess that you pulled your sister's hair or friend's hair. You have to find the reason why. Now, what can the reason be for you to pull your friend's hair? What do you think the reason could be? And I said, well, because she did it to me first. Well, that is the reason, yes, but it's not the real reason. It's not the real reason. I remember those words. The real reason. Okay. Think about it a little bit more. Think about it a little bit more deeply. Is there any other reason behind that reason? Think about it. Well, because she's always doing things to me and she makes me mad and this and that, and okay, so that is an additional reason. You're tired of it, and okay. But that is not the whole reason yet. Think about it a little bit more deeply. Is there any other real reason? Anyway, long story. I had to go around thinking about all these real reasons. But at the end, I got there. And I said, because she's prettier than I am. And I hate her for it. That's the real reason. Jealousy, envy. That is what you confess. In other words, you have to get to the vice that originates the wrongdoing. So what you confess is that you're jealous or envious, and in this particular case, it manifested itself in pulling someone's hair. But the sin is what you confess, is the vice that originated that. Because otherwise, it was explained to me at the age of 7, if what you confess is that you pull someone's hair, next week you will not pull someone's hair, but you'll kick her or throw her or whatever, throw something at her. So it doesn't solve the problem. What originates everything is jealousy and envy, and that is what you confess. Okay, this is an example, guys, because you see, at the end of it all is actually know yourself. And if you really can do this, and for those non-Catholics or Catholics who don't go to confession, it doesn't really matter. The point is that you have to know yourself, and the real reason that give rise and originate your actions. And I am a firm believer that if you do that, you're probably not going to need a psychologist, because you know yourself. And when you do something that you're ashamed of, when you do something wrong, we all do so, it prevents you from start blaming everybody else. And if you have to blame someone else, indeed, I'm not culpable of this was that situation, but not as an excuse to always defend yourself and you do nothing wrong. And I think this knowing yourself avoids all kinds of psychological problems. I really do. I have a mosquito here. Okay, so I think that countries, this is my point, I think that countries have to do the same. You have to accept what you are. The Polish people, the Irish people, and many other people, you're not the only ones, they're not the only ones, have been the butt of jokes from Western Europeans for a long, long time. They were looked down upon for whatever reasons. Perhaps the Catholic thing was part of it, actually, but for whatever reasons, how many poles do you need to change a light bulb? That kind of thing. The Irish especially. The English had always jokes about the Irish people. My point is that when these nations are now trying to leave themselves behind, as it were, and start in this, we are more Western than the West. This solicitous, servile attitude towards the West is not going to solve many of their problems. I think they have to accept that this is my history. This is where we were. The Russian people were also in this circumstance. And why create this hatred now and this resentment towards the Russian people? I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I don't think this resentment is going to lead them anywhere, because at the end the West will abandon them and disdain them, as they always did. And so you're forgetting yourself in order to please others. I, as a Spaniard, I look at Russia and also Ireland, because I see a lot of things in common. Of course, different histories, different people, different languages, different everything. But nevertheless, this being at the periphery of Europe, we have things in common. With the Russian people, well, from my part of Spain, for example, the northwest, we are Celts and we have a lot of things in common with Irish culture. Not only the folklore and the bagpipes, but also the melancholy part of our nature there in the northwestern Spain. But of course, that's only one region. But I find myself, as I read Russian literature, that this perhaps is just being at the periphery. I find that I can understand the Russian soul, or whatever you may want to call it. And we're both kind of artistic, we have a sort of an artistic personality, and there are a lot of things as I read Russian literature that I have no problem identifying myself with it. Let me look at my notes so that I don't lose my train of thought. And of course, one of the common characteristics, and we are not the only ones, is that these are very old countries. And we have been invaded by just about everybody, and, the histories. We carry a lot of scars in our histories. And some of us have learned from that better than others and so on, but we do carry scars. Our nations do. I was just thinking, the Bolshoi Theater in Moscow, the ballet and the opera and the music, that's older than the United States of America. I think it was 1776. And I have a thing that hurts me, and I don't know why, but I feel uncomfortable when the Russian people are treated in the way that they are being treated at the moment. Why? Well, politically at the moment, I think most of us can think of an answer and so on. Vast area, natural resources. The idea that it could be broken up and, others could take advantage of it. And it seems to me that the Russian people are holding fast to who they are. At least, let's give them that. Instead of trying to please their new masters, they do not accept. They put a stop to stopping being themselves. So you have a country where, a modern country, industrialized country, powerful in whichever way they can, But nevertheless, it might be the only country, apart perhaps from Hungary, that hasn't, in Europe, that hasn't accepted this new modern, postmodern, Gnostic, irreligious view of life. So you have a modern country in Russia where men are men and women are women and children are children, and they do not accept what we have to offer. It is, I think, the only European country that is doing this. Of course, there are many other countries that do not accept the Western values as we have them at the moment. The Global South, the Middle East. But they are not European countries. When I think about the Middle Eastern countries, for example, my thoughts always, when I am in a melancholy mood, go back to the fact that 2,000 years ago, over 2,000 years ago, that is where Christianity was strongest, wasn't it? Hear about Damascus and Antioch and Constantinople. So many saints, Christian saints, so many Christian martyrs from what we now call the Middle East, or the Arabic and non-Arabic, but Muslim countries. There is a theory, which is probably way out, but I think Islam started, in the 6th century? 6th century, yes. And that it might have been encouraged or cajoled by anti-Christian forces of that time. I am not saying inspired or anything like that. I'm not going here against the principles of the religion or how it came about. But it was encouraged. Anyway, in any case, now these countries have their own religion, and of course they're not coming back to Christianity, but Christianity was born there. Yeah. In the case of Russia, for example, the English, it's almost a Russophobia that there is there. I don't quite know why. I'm sure that, I was going to say I'm sure there are reasons, but that would mean that I agree. Well, perhaps I would agree, I don't know. But it seems that the British haven't forgotten the Crimea War from the 1850s. That's almost over 150 years ago. It's this hatred for Russia, and I don't know what Russia did to us, to the rest of Europe. You can say, well, after the Second World War they invaded. Yes, but that was the agreement that they had between East and West, Churchill, Roosevelt, and and Stalin, of course. But they were there, being Russia, quite happily, well, perhaps unhappily with Stalin, but in any case, it was Germany, wasn't it? It was Europe that invaded them. The outcome was the result of that initial invasion. But I don't know what else they have done to us. In any case, these are my thoughts at the moment, and coming back to where I started. I'm going to read you a tiny little bit. Please don't go away. Please don't go away. Because I think you will enjoy it. You heard of Hilaire Belloc. Yes, he was a writer from, I think he was born in 1870, died in 1850, I believe, and so he lived through perhaps a little, no, I don't think perhaps 1840. I don't think he lived through the Second World War, but he certainly did live during the First World War. And he was an Englishman, well, half English and half French. Both native language. He was a historian. He studied here at the University of Oxford in Balliol College. And he wrote, and he loves both countries. And, you know, it's when you love both countries, it's like, I feel the same way with Spain and England. Sometimes you are torn. You see both sides, you see the characteristics of each, and for the most part it's an asset, but sometimes it breaks your heart because you don't know which way to go here. Anyway, so he wrote very Catholic author, by the way. One of his main books is Europe and the Faith, and it's about the history of Europe, basically. And he has a lot to say about the Reformation and how that was the beginning of the dismembering of Europe. Well, you may disagree with it, but very intelligent. He makes a very good point. Now, he was a very prolific writer, and he wrote a lot of things, but also poetry and some tiny little essays about things. He used to travel a lot, and you know, he has essays on a lot of essays about England, English old towns, and all kinds of things. And he wrote something that most Irish people probably are aware of on St. Patrick. But he's not really going to talk about saint. He's going to talk about Ireland. And I think you probably can get it on the internet. But this, I'm going to read it to you because I just want to. I was reading one of his books, and I thought I have to pay homage to this great writer. Hazlitt, an English writer, said about the French writer Montaigne that he had the courage to say as a writer what he felt as a man. And this can be applied to Mr. Belloc. If the editor of this book says, if you were only to substitute thought for felt. His characteristics as an author are a profound respect for tradition and a distrust of the entire modern hullabaloo about progress, a hatred of pretentiousness, hypocrisy, and priggishness, a contempt for muddled thinking, active enjoyment of living, always traveling and tasting different cheeses and wines. They had a great time. And an insatiable appetite for discovery in travel, in reading, and in observation of his fellow men. An ardent love of the Roman foundation of Europe, of the English landscape, of French energy. He's a terrific writer, and you learn a lot from it. knowing, the editor says, knowing that his ideas were unpopular, he went on drumming them in for whoever would listen. He, quote, never made a poor song so that he might have a heavier purse. Never wrote for money. And whether new essayists arise or not, Mr. Belloc will be read as long as men care for good prose. And in days to be, readers coming new to his work will, I think, say that here was one who saw to what chaos the breakdown of the Christian religion was leading Europe, who persistently condemned the poisonous sham philosophy which attempted to take its place, and was the most authoritative voice of warning in those black times at the beginning of the 20th century, when so many lost the power of reason and fed on despair. Excuse me. His fame, for which, like all wise men, he cares little, will increase. And so let me read you, if I may, very short, a tiny little essay dedicated to Ireland. It's just 3 pages, very short pages. If there is one thing that people who are not Catholic have gone wrong upon more than another in the intellectual things of life, it is the conception of a personality. They are muddled about it where their own little selves are concerned. They misappreciate it when they deal with the problems of society, and they have a very weak hold of it when they consider, if they do consider, the nature of Almighty God. Now, personality is everything. It was a personal will that made all things, visible and invisible. Our hope of immortality resides in this, that we are persons, and half our frailties proceed from a misapprehension of the awful responsibilities which personality involves, or a cowardly ignorance of its powers of self-government. The 101 errors which this main error leads to include a bad error on the nature of history. Your modern non-Catholic or anti-Catholic historian is always misunderstanding, underestimating, or muddling the role played in the affairs of men by great and individual personalities. That is why he is so lamentably weak upon the function of legend. That is why he makes a fetish of documentary evidence and has no grip upon the value of tradition. For traditions spring from some personality invariably, and the function of a legend, whether it be a rigidly true legend or one tinged with make-believe, is to interpret personality. Legends have vitality and continue because in their origin they so exactly serve to explain or illustrate some personal character in a man with no cold statement which no cold statement could give. Now, St. Patrick, the whole story and effect of him is a matter of personality. There was once, 20 or 30 years ago, a whole school of dunderheads who wondered whether St. Patrick ever existed, because the mass of legends surrounding his name troubled them. How on earth, one wonders, do such scholars consider their fellow beings? Have they ever seen a crowd cheering a popular hero, or noticed the expression upon men's faces when they spoke of some friend of striking power recently dead? A great growth of legends around the man is the very best proof you could have, not only of his existence, but of the fact that he was an origin and a beginning, and that this sprang from his will or his vision. There were some who seemed to think, in a kind of favour done to the indestructible body of Irish Catholicism, when Mr. Barry wrote his learned Protestant book upon St. Patrick. It was a critical and very careful bit of work, and was deservedly praised. But the favour done us I could not see. It is all to the advantage of non-Catholic history that it should be sane, and that a great Protestant historian should make true history out of a great historical figure was a very good sign. It was a long step back towards common sense compared with the German absurdities which had left their victims doubting almost all the solid foundations of the European story. But as for us Catholics, we had no need to be told it. Not only was there St. Patrick in history, but there is a St. Patrick on the shores of his eastern sea and throughout all Ireland today. It is a presence that stares you in the face and physically almost haunts you. Let a man sail along the Leinster coast on such a day as renders the Wicklow Mountains clear up weather behind him, and the Mourne Mountains, perhaps in storm, lifted clearly above the sea down the wind. He is taking some such course as that on which St. Patrick sailed, and if he will land from time to time from his little boat at the end of each day's sailing, and hear Mass in the morning before he sails farther northward, he will know in what way St. Patrick inhabits the soil which he rendered sacred. We know that among the marks of holiness is the working of miracles. Ireland is the greatest miracle any saint ever worked. It is a miracle and the nexus of miracles. Among other miracles, it is a nation raised from the dead. The preservation of the faith by the Irish is a historical miracle comparable to nothing else in Europe. There never was, and please God never can be, so prolonged and insanely violent a persecution of men by their fellow men as was undertaken for centuries against the faith in Ireland, and it has completely failed. I know of no example in history of failure following upon such effort. It had behind it, in combination, the two most powerful of the evil passions of men, terror and greed. And so amazing it is that they did not attain their end, that perpetually, as one reads, one finds the authors of the dreadful business now at one period, now at another, assuming with certitude that their success is achieved. And then, after centuries, it is almost suddenly perceived, and in our own time, that it has not been achieved and never will be. What a complexity of strange coincidences combined, coming out of nothing as it were, advancing like spirits summoned onto the stage and to effect this end. Think of the American colonies. With one little exception, they were perhaps the most completely non-Catholic society of their time. Their successful rebellion against the mother country meant many things and led to many prophecies. Who could have guessed that one of its chief results would be the furnishing of a free refuge for the Irish? The famine, all human opinion imagined, and all human judgment was bound to conclude, was a mortal wound, coming in as the ally of the vile persecution I have named. It has turned out the very contrary. From it there springs indirectly the dispersion and that power which comes from unity in dispersion of Irish Catholicism. Who, looking at the huge financial power that dominated Europe and England in particular during the youth of our own generation, beginning of the 20th generation, could have dreamt that in any corner of Europe, least of all in the poorest and most ruined corner of Christendom, an effective resistance could be raised. Behind the enemies of Ireland, furnishing them with all their modern strength, was that base and secret master of modern things, the usurer. He it was far more than the gentry of the island who demanded toll, and through the mortgages on the Irish states had determined to drain Ireland as he had drained and rendered desert so much else. Is it not a miracle that he has failed? Ireland is a nation risen from the dead, and to raise one man from the dead is surely miraculous enough to convince one of the power of a great spirit. This miracle, as I am prepared to believe, is the last and the greatest of St. Patrick's. When I was last in Ireland, I bought in the town of Wexford a beautiful coloured picture of St. Patrick, which greatly pleased me. Most of it was green in colour, and St. Patrick wore a mitre and had a crosier in his hand, the bishop's staff. And he was turning into the sea a number of nasty reptiles, snakes and toads and all the rest. But I bought this picture because it seemed to me as modern a piece of symbolism as ever I had seen. And that was why I bought it for my children and for my home. There was a few pence change, but I did not want it. The person who sold me the picture said they would spend the change in candles for St. Patrick's altar. So, St. Patrick is still alive. Okay, that is Belloc's. I know that most of you have read it probably, but I thought it was a nice homage to Ireland from Hilaire Belloc. I will leave you there today. The only thing is that why did I read that? Because it seems that Ireland now, he's writing, as I said, at the beginning of the 20th century. And Ireland today is a different Ireland. And what many could not achieve, the Catholic faith is perhaps to a large extent gone. And so what we have, I will finish as I started. With St. Patrick forgotten, what we now have in Ireland is a demand from government that 300,000 cows be killed. That's progress for you. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.